It is a landscape from another world, a surrealist dreamscape carved into the earth of northwestern Spain. Unearthly, crimson spires of rock claw at the sky, their flanks scarred and hollowed. This is Las Medulas. At first glance, it appears to be a work of bizarre natural erosion. It is not. This is a wound. It is the ghost of a mountain, the colossal, man-made ruin of the largest and most destructive industrial operation in the entire ancient world. This was a Roman gold mine. But the Romans did not just dig here. They waged a war against the mountains themselves, shattering them with the power of water to get at the treasure within. This documentary will investigate how and, more importantly, why Rome did this. What imperial hunger was so great that it required the literal consumption of mountains to satisfy it. To understand this act of geological violence, we must journey back to the very birth of the Roman Empire. The year is 31 BC. The final, bloody civil wars of the Republic are over. Octavian, soon to be hailed as the Emperor Augustus, stands as the sole master of the Roman world. He has won the war. But now he faces a far greater challenge. He must govern a vast, traumatized, and nearly bankrupt empire. And an empire runs on one thing above all else: money. The new, professionalized Roman army, a force of over 25 legions and 500,000 men, was no longer a citizen militia that served for a season. It was a standing, full-time force, the guarantor of the new Pax Romana, the Roman peace. And these soldiers demanded regular, reliable payment in hard currency. At the same time, Augustus was attempting to stabilize the entire imperial economy with a new, trustworthy gold coin, the aureus. To pay his soldiers and to back his new currency, he needed a massive and steady influx of one critical, strategic metal, gold. The old sources of the Republic were not enough. Augustus needed a treasure chest, and he found it in the last, unconquered corner of the Iberian Peninsula. The final campaigns of the Cantabrian and Asturian Wars were not a simple mopping-up operation. They were a strategic corporate acquisition. The Romans knew that the mountains of northwestern Spain held one of the largest deposits of alluvial gold in the world. But it was low-grade gold, a fine dust of tiny particles trapped not in rich veins, but diffused within entire mountains of gravel and clay. It could not be extracted with a simple pickaxe. To unlock this immense resource, Roman engineers deployed a revolutionary and terrifyingly destructive form of hydraulic mining technology known to history as Ruina Montium, the wrecking of the mountains. This was not mining, it was geological warfare. This investigation will deconstruct this incredible feat of engineering. We will chart the network of massive aqueducts the Romans built to bring the water, we will go inside the mountains they honeycombed with tunnels, and we will witness the apocalyptic moment when they unleashed the flood. We will follow the gold pipeline from the shattered mountains of Spain to the imperial mints, and from there into the purses of the legionaries guarding Hadrian's wall. We will use the words of an eyewitness, the encyclopedist Pliny the Elder, to quantify the staggering scale of this industrial operation and the river of gold it produced. This is the story of the hidden financial bedrock of the Roman Empire, a story of how the quest for a stable economy and a paid army led to a technological triumph, an environmental catastrophe, and the creation of one of the most bizarre and beautiful landscapes on Earth. The Roman Empire, born from the ashes of a century of civil war, was an enterprise of unprecedented scale, and it came with an unprecedented price tag. Augustus, as the first emperor, had inherited not a republic, but a sprawling, multi-continental military machine that was deeply in debt and dangerously unstable. His greatest challenge was not conquering new lands, but consolidating his power and securing a lasting peace, the Pax Romana. And he knew that peace, in the Roman world, was not free. It had to be paid for. It had to be bought with a steady, reliable, and massive supply of the one commodity that could satisfy the demands of both soldiers and senators: gold. The insatiable hunger for gold in the early empire was not a matter of luxury or avarice. It was the central defining problem of the new imperial economy and the absolute bedrock of national security. The most immediate and non-negotiable of these costs was the Roman army. The legions that had won the civil wars for Augustus were no longer the citizen farmers of the old republic. They were a permanent, professional, standing army of long-serving veterans. Their loyalty was not to the abstract ideal of the state, but to the general who paid them. Augustus now commanded over 25 of these legions, a force of some 300,000 to 500,000 men, when including the auxiliary troops, garrisoned permanently on the vast frontiers from Syria to the Rhine. To prevent the rise of new rivals, Augustus had to ensure that these soldiers' loyalty was transferred from their individual generals to him, the emperor, and to the state. And the only way to do that was to guarantee their pay. A Roman legionary salary was the single largest recurring expense in the imperial budget. It had to be paid on time, and it had to be paid in hard, trusted currency. Furthermore, at the end of their long 16 to 20-year term of service, these veterans were promised a substantial retirement bonus, either a plot of good farmland or a large, one-time cash payment, the premium militiae. This was a colossal, long-term financial commitment. The failure to meet this obligation was not an option. It was a direct invitation to mutiny and civil war. To fund this massive military-industrial complex, the state needed a river of precious metals, a constant and reliable flow of wealth that the depleted, war-torn provinces of the old republic could no longer provide. Concurrent with this military crisis was an economic one. The civil wars had shattered the stability of the Roman currency. The various warlords, Caesar, Pompey, Antony, and Octavian himself, had all minted their own coins to pay their armies, leading to a confusing and often debased monetary system. To restore faith in the economy, Augustus initiated a sweeping monetary reform. At the very top of his new, unified currency system, he placed a magnificent, high-purity gold coin, the aureus. The aureus, worth 25 silver denarii, was to be the new gold standard of the Mediterranean world, the primary denomination for large-scale state payments, for international trade, and for storing imperial wealth. Must have the gold to back it up. The very credibility of the Augustan economy, the trust in his new currency, and his ability to project an image of overwhelming power and stability was directly tied to the amount of gold he held in the state treasury. He needed to build a massive strategic reserve of the precious metal. The old gold sources, from the inherited treasuries of conquered kings and the small-scale mines of the Republic, were not nearly enough to meet this new dual demand from the army and the currency. Augustus needed a new source, a massive, industrial-scale, and, most importantly, state-controlled supply of gold. This imperial hunger for gold, therefore, was a perfectly rational response to the immense challenges of a new age. It was the financial foundation of the Pax Romana. The gold was needed to pay the soldiers who patrolled the frontiers, preventing the barbarian invasions that had plagued the Republic. It was needed to fund the immense public works programs in the city of Rome, the new temples, aqueducts, and public buildings that served as a powerful form of imperial propaganda and a way to employ the urban masses. It was needed to pay the salaries of the sprawling imperial bureaucracy that administered the empire. And it was needed as a diplomatic tool, to be paid as subsidies to client kings on the borders of the empire, buying their loyalty and creating a buffer against external threats. Every aspect of the new imperial system, from its military security to its economic stability and its political legitimacy, was dependent on this one single commodity. The quest for gold was not the whim of a greedy emperor. It was the central, overriding, and non-negotiable strategic imperative of the Augustan age. The emperor who could secure a massive, reliable, and long-term supply of gold could secure his dynasty and his empire. It was this desperate, foundational need that drove the Roman legions into the last, unconquered corner of Spain, a land that, according to the geographers, was not just rich in gold, but was literally made of it. The Roman imagination had long been captivated by the idea of Hispania as a land of legendary mineral wealth. It was the far west of their world, a place of silver mountains and rivers that ran with gold. For centuries, the Romans had fought the Carthaginians and the native Iberian tribes for control of the peninsula's rich silver mines in the south, a primary source of wealth for the Republic. But after the final victory of Augustus and the complete subjugation of the peninsula, Roman geologists and mining engineers began to systematically survey their new province. And in the rugged, mountainous northwest, in the lands of the recently conquered Astures and Canterbury tribes, they identified a source of gold so immense that it would dwarf all others. This was not a traditional mine, a rich vein of gold hidden deep in the earth. It was an entire landscape that was soaked in gold. The geology of this region is unique. The mountains of what are now the provinces of Leon and Asturias are composed of ancient, mineral-rich rock. Over millions of years, geological processes had infused this rock with tiny, almost microscopic, particles of gold. Then, during the Tertiary period, massive river systems eroded these primary sources, washing the gold-bearing rock down from the mountains and redepositing it in colossal alluvial fans, creating a series of vast, thick layers of gold-bearing conglomerate. The result was a geological treasure chest of almost unbelievable scale. Entire mountains, like the Medulla's Massif, were now composed of this gold-bearing gravel and clay, a mixture of earth and treasure. The gold itself was of very high purity, but it was present in an incredibly low grade. This was the central challenge. There were no large nuggets to be picked from a riverbed, no rich veins to be followed deep into the earth. The gold existed as a fine, flour-like dust, a diffuse and almost invisible treasure locked within a mountain of worthless rock. The total quantity of gold was immense, but the concentration was tiny. For the local, pre-Roman tribes, the Astures and the Cantabri, this gold was a known and accessible resource, but their methods of extraction were small-scale and laborious, limited by their simple technology. These tribes practiced a form of primitive hydraulic mining. They would dig channels to divert water from the local streams and use it to wash the gold-bearing gravels. The water would carry away the lighter sand and clay, while the heavier gold particles would be trapped in the bottom of the channel, often with the help of woolen fleeces, a technique remarkably similar to the one used on the Pactolus River in Lydia. This was an effective, but incredibly slow and small-scale process. It was a form of artisanal mining, capable of supplying the local chieftains with the beautiful gold torques and bracelets that defined their elite status, but it could never produce the industrial quantities of gold that the Roman imperial economy now demanded. When the Roman engineers arrived, they saw this landscape with different eyes. They were not interested in the small-scale panning operations of the locals. They were the agents of a superpower with an insatiable strategic demand, and they possessed a level of engineering skill, a command of capital, and an ability to mobilize labor that was unparalleled in the ancient world. They looked at the mountains of Las Medullas not as a place for patient, artisanal work, but as a massive engineering problem that required a massive industrial-scale solution. Their goal was not to pan the rivers, but to process the entire mountain itself. They understood that the key to unlocking this low-grade resource was volume. To get a few ounces of gold, they would have to wash many tons of earth. To get the thousands of pounds of gold that the emperor demanded every year, they would need to wash millions of tons of earth. This was a challenge that could not be solved with a simple pickaxe and a gold pan. It required a new and revolutionary technology, a way to apply an overwhelming and almost geological scale force to the landscape. Their solution was a brilliant and terrifying application of their mastery of hydraulic engineering. They realized that the most powerful tool for excavating and washing the gold-bearing earth was water itself, but on a scale that had never been conceived of before. They would not just bring a stream to the gravel, they would bring an entire artificial river to the mountain. This was the birth of the idea of Ruina Montium, the wrecking of the mountains. It was a vision of almost insane ambition, to harness the power of water to physically demolish a mountain, to wash its entire contents through a massive filtration system, and to extract the fine golden dust that was the ultimate prize. The treasure chest of Hispania was about to be broken open with a hydraulic key of colossal and devastating power. The Roman engineers who arrived in northwestern Spain were faced with a problem of immense scale and a tantalizing prize. To extract the diffuse, low-grade gold from the mountains of Las Medullas, they needed to invent a process that could move and wash millions of tons of earth with an efficiency that was previously unimaginable. Their solution, Ruina Montium, was not just an improvement on existing mining techniques, it was a complete paradigm shift. It was a form of hydraulic warfare, a brilliant and brutal application of Roman engineering genius that weaponized water itself to physically annihilate the landscape. The process can be broken down into three equally audacious stages: the creation of a massive water supply system, the honeycombing of the mountain itself, and a final, apocalyptic release that would tear the mountain apart. The first and most critical stage was to bring a river to the mountain. The gold-bearing mountains of Las Medullas were located in a relatively dry region, far from any major, high-volume water source. The Roman engineers needed to capture water from the rain-rich mountains of the Sierra de la Cabrera, dozens of miles away, and transport it with minimal loss of elevation and pressure to the mining site. To do this, they constructed one of the most remarkable and least-known aqueduct systems in the entire Roman world. This was not a single grand arched aqueduct like the Pont du Gard, but a complex, braided network of at least 7 major canals with a total length of over 200 miles, all painstakingly carved out of the mountainsides. The engineering required was breathtaking. The canals were often only a few feet wide, but they were surveyed with incredible precision. They had to follow the contours of the mountains, maintaining a very slight but constant downward gradient of around 1%. Too steep, and the water would erode the channel. Too shallow, and it would not flow with enough force. The Roman surveyors, using simple instruments like the chorobates and the groma, achieved a level of accuracy that is astonishing even by modern standards. They cut tunnels, some hundreds of feet long, directly through solid rock promontories that blocked their path, and they built massive retaining walls to carry the channels across unstable slopes. The result was a massive, artificial river system, a network of arteries designed to deliver millions of gallons of water to the very top of the mining complex, where it was collected in large, man-made reservoirs. The weapon was now in position. The second stage was to prepare the mountain for its own destruction. While the water was being gathered, armies of miners, likely conscripted local laborers, would begin to attack the mountain itself. Their task was to drive a complex and carefully planned network of galleries and tunnels deep into the gold-bearing conglomerate. These were not the reinforced permanent tunnels of a deep shaft mine. They were narrow, temporary, and incredibly dangerous adits, their only purpose to weaken the mountain from within, to create a network of voids and fissures. This was a slow, terrifying, and back-breaking process, undertaken with simple iron picks and shovels, often in near-total darkness. The miners would follow the richest layers of the gold-bearing gravel, honeycombing the entire mountain with a maze-like system of intersecting tunnels, like termites eating away at a massive wooden beam. When the tunnels were complete and the great reservoirs above were full, the final, spectacular, and terrifying stage could begin. This was the Ruina Montium itself. The sluice gates of the reservoirs would be opened, and a massive, roaring torrent of water would be unleashed, plunging down the channels and into the network of galleries that had been dug into the mountain. The effect was that of a colossal hydraulic piston. The water, with nowhere else to go, would instantly pressurize the air trapped in the tunnels. This immense, explosive pressure of compressed air and water, with a force far greater than any man-made explosive of the day, would literally blow the side of the mountain apart. The contemporary writer, Pliny the Elder, who may have witnessed this process firsthand as a procurator in Spain, described it with a sense of both awe and terror. The mountain is hollowed out by galleries. Then the mountain, rent to pieces, is torn asunder with a crash that is impossible for the human mind to conceive, and a wind of incredible force. What followed the explosion was a second, even more powerful, wave of destruction. The full volume of the water from the reservoirs, now released, would surge through the collapsed mountain, creating a massive, man-made landslide and flash flood. This torrent of water, mud, and rock, carrying the entire contents of the shattered mountain, was the ultimate, brutal, but incredibly efficient excavation machine. The work of 10,000 men for a year could be accomplished in a single, apocalyptic afternoon. The mountain had been wrecked, and the first stage of the harvest could begin. The Ruina Montium was a triumph of engineering, a process that harnessed the forces of nature on a geological scale. But this immense technological system was utterly dependent on a second, equally important machine, the human machine. The construction of the aqueducts, the digging of the galleries, and the processing of the debris required the organized labor of tens of thousands of individuals. This was not a slave-run plantation in the traditional sense. The workforce at Las Medulas was a complex and stratified society, a massive industrial army composed of skilled Roman engineers, a vast corps of conscripted local labor, and the necessary support staff to sustain the entire operation. The story of this workforce is the story of the immense human cost and the remarkable organizational genius behind the Roman imperial economy. At the absolute top of this human pyramid were the Roman engineers. These were likely specialists drawn from the Roman army, the most skilled and experienced corps of engineers in the ancient world. They were the masterminds of the entire operation. They possessed the technical knowledge of hydraulics, of surveying, and of geology needed to plan and execute a project of this magnitude. They would have used their simple but effective instruments to survey the hundreds of miles of aqueduct channels, calculating the precise gradients needed to ensure the water flowed with the correct force. They would have overseen the construction of the reservoirs and the sluice gates. and they would have been the ones to direct the digging of the underground galleries, using their geological knowledge to target the richest gold-bearing strata and to ensure the mountain's collapse was as effective as possible. These men were the elite, the highly paid, white-collar technicians of the Roman industrial machine. The muscle of the operation, the great mass of the workforce, was composed of the local indigenous peoples, the recently conquered Astures and Canterbury. Pliny the Elder states that as many as 60,000 local laborers were employed at the mines. While some may have been slaves captured in the final wars, the consensus is that the majority of this workforce was a form of conscripted or corvée labor. This was a common Roman practice in the provinces, a system where local communities were required to provide a certain number of men for a certain number of days to work on state projects as a form of taxation. For the young men of northwestern Spain, a term of service in the terrifying and dangerous gold mines may have been an unavoidable part of life. The work was brutal and incredibly dangerous. The men who dug the galleries deep inside the mountain faced the constant and very real threat of sudden collapse. Pliny describes the work in harrowing detail. It is a more rash undertaking to go seeking for treasures in the bowels of the earth. The miners, suspended by ropes, explore the face of the rock. They pass whole months in this way, in the darkness of the galleries, a state of things which the workmen themselves call a day that is night. Death from rock falls, from suffocation, or from simple exhaustion would have been a daily occurrence. The men who worked on the surface, building the aqueducts along sheer cliff faces, faced a similar risk. This was a high-mortality enterprise, and the Roman state would have viewed the lives of these provincial laborers as an entirely expendable resource. This massive workforce needed to be housed, fed, and managed. Around the great mining complexes, a new and distinct type of settlement emerged, the mining town. These were not the grand, monumental cities of the Roman elite, but gritty, functional, industrial settlements. They were populated by the conscripted workers, the Roman engineers and administrators, and a host of support personnel, blacksmiths to sharpen the tools, carpenters to build the sluices, and merchants to supply the food and other necessities that the mining community could not produce itself. This was a complete, artificial ecosystem, an entire society whose existence was solely dedicated to the production of gold for the imperial economy. The entire operation was almost certainly under the direct control of an imperial procurator, a financial agent of the equestrian class who answered directly to the emperor. He was the CEO of the entire mining district, his job to ensure that the gold production quotas were met, that the workforce was managed, and that the final, precious product was securely transported back to the imperial mints. The presence of the Roman military was ubiquitous. A legion, likely the Legio Vicemina stationed at nearby Lyon, would have served as the ultimate security force, quelling any potential uprisings from the conscripted workforce and, most importantly, guarding the immense quantities of gold that were being produced. The entire human machine, from the lowest status miner to the highest-ranking procurator, was a rigid, hierarchical, and ruthlessly efficient system, designed for one purpose and one purpose only: to fuel the imperial machine with its most essential and life-giving commodity. The Ruina Montium was the spectacular and violent overture, an act of geological demolition on an almost unimaginable scale. But the destruction of the mountain was not the end of the process, it was merely the beginning. The great, apocalyptic landslide of water, mud, and rock that roared from the shattered mountain was not a waste product. It was the raw material, a slurry containing the precious, microscopic flecks of gold that were the ultimate prize. The second and equally brilliant stage of the Roman mining operation was the golden harvest, a massive, industrial-scale system of hydraulic filtration and collection designed to sift through the debris of a dead mountain and extract every last ounce of its hidden treasure. This was not the simple gold pan of a lone prospector. This was a man-made river delta, an industrial wetland engineered for the efficient capture of a precious metal. The first stage of this process was to manage the initial cataclysmic torrent. The Roman engineers did not allow the landslide to simply dissipate into the natural landscape. They had constructed a series of massive settling ponds and channels directly at the base of the mountain. These were designed to capture the initial chaotic flood and to allow the largest, heaviest, and most barren rocks and boulders to settle out of the water. This was the first coarse filter in the great washing machine. From these primary ponds, The now finer, but still incredibly dense, slurry of water, clay, sand, and gold was carefully channeled into a second, even more complex network. This was the Agoge, the great system of washing channels. Their gradient had to be perfect, steep enough to keep the water flowing with enough force to carry away the lighter sand and clay, but gentle enough to allow the much heavier particles of gold to fall out of suspension and settle on the bottom. Archaeological remains of these vast, braided channel systems are still clearly visible at Las Medulas today, the fossilized arteries of the great gold washing machine. But how did they trap the fine gold dust and prevent it from being simply washed away with the rest of the sediment? The answer was a brilliant and surprisingly organic piece of technology. Pliny the Elder describes the process in detail. The bottoms of these washing channels, he tells us, were lined with ilex, a type of dense, thorny, and naturally greasy shrub, likely a gorse or broom, which was abundant in the region. This dense mat of prickly vegetation acted as a natural, large-scale sluice box. The heavy gold particles, tumbling along the bottom of the channel, would be caught and trapped in the intricate, fibrous mesh of the thorny branches, while the lighter, worthless mud and sand would be washed over the top and carried away. This was an industrial-scale application of the same principle behind the golden fleece used in the Pactolus River, but it was far more systematic and efficient. The process would continue for months. The slurry from the collapsed mountain would be continuously washed through this vast network of shrub-lined channels until the entire mountain of debris had been sifted. The water, now carrying only the finest, barren silt, would be discharged into the lower river valleys, a process that would have had a catastrophic environmental impact, choking the natural rivers with millions of tons of sediment. When the washing process was complete, the final and most delicate stage of the harvest began. The water flow would be shut off, and the ilex branches in the channels would be carefully dried. Then, Pliny tells us, the shrubs are burned and the ashes washed upon a bed of turf so that the gold may be deposited upon it. The process was simple and brilliant. The workers would set fire to the entire vast network of dried gold-impregnated shrubs. The intense fire would burn away the organic material of the plants, leaving behind only an ash that was now heavily concentrated with the captured particles of gold. This ash was then carefully collected and taken to a final washing area, where it would be panned by hand in large wooden bowls, or batillas, to separate the pure heavy gold from the lighter ash. The final result of this immense, multi-stage, and environmentally destructive process was a fine, pure, and brilliant golden dust. This dust would then be taken to the on-site foundries, where it was melted down in crucibles and cast into the first rough, standardized ingots, ready to be weighed, recorded, and sent on the next leg of its journey. The golden harvest was complete. Through a combination of overwhelming hydraulic force, precise channel engineering, and the clever use of a simple, thorny plant, the Roman engineers had achieved the impossible. They had taken a mountain that contained only a few, scattered grams of gold per ton, and had successfully and profitably extracted that treasure. The scarred, crimson landscape of Las Medulas is a silent monument to an industrial operation of almost unimaginable scale. But how can we truly comprehend that scale? How can we move beyond simple superlatives and quantify the sheer magnitude of the Roman achievement? The answer, miraculously, has been preserved for us in the words of a man who was not just a scholar, but a high-ranking Roman official who served as a procurator in Hispania in the 70s AD. This was Pliny the Elder. In his monumental encyclopedia, the Naturalis Historia, he provides a detailed, novel-rich, and utterly astonishing eyewitness account of the hydraulic mining operations. His testimony is the Rosetta Stone for understanding Las Medulas, a document that allows us to put hard numbers to the spectacle and to prove, beyond any doubt, that this was the single largest and most ambitious industrial enterprise in the entire Roman world. Pliny, a man of science and administration, was clearly both fascinated and horrified by the process he was witnessing. He understood the immense engineering genius on display, but he also saw its terrifying, world-altering power. He begins by describing the immense labor of building the aqueducts, a feat he considered greater than the pyramids. He writes, "The water is brought from the mountain streams, often 100 miles away. The gradient is calculated with the utmost precision. Tunnels have to be driven through solid rock. It is a work that surpasses the labors of the giants." His figure of 100 miles may be an exaggeration for a single channel, but modern archaeological surveys have confirmed that the total length of the interconnected aqueduct network was far greater, a testament to the accuracy of his ore. But it is his figures for the output of the mines that are truly breathtaking. In this way, he writes, Asturia, Galicia, and Lusitania furnish to the value of £20,000 weight of gold per annum. 20,000 Roman pounds. That is the equivalent of roughly 6.6 metric tons, or nearly 15,000 modern pounds of pure gold, every single year. This was not a short-lived gold rush. This was a steady, industrial-scale output that was sustained for over 2 centuries. The total amount of gold extracted from this single region is estimated to have been in the hundreds of tons, perhaps as much as 1,500 tons, a quantity that would have completely reshaped the entire economy of the Roman Empire. To achieve this incredible output, Pliny tells us, required a workforce of commensurate scale. He states that the operations employed 60,000 workmen. While this number likely refers to the entire northwestern mining district and not just Las Medulas alone, it speaks to a massive, mobilized industrial army. This was a workforce larger than a dozen Roman legions combined, a colossal human machine dedicated to the single task of feeding the imperial treasury. This figure gives us a clear sense of the immense priority the Roman state placed on this operation. The gold of Spain was not a minor provincial trade. It was a strategic imperative on the same level as a major military campaign. The scale of the water usage, the very fuel of the Ruina Montium, was equally colossal. The Roman engineers were not just diverting streams, they were moving entire rivers. Modern hydrological studies of the aqueduct remains have calculated the potential flow rates. The system was capable of delivering a volume of water that was many times greater than the volume of water supplied by the famous aqueducts to the city of Rome itself. The Aqua Appia, Rome's first great aqueduct, was a marvel of civic engineering. But the Las Medulas aqueduct network was an industrial tool of a completely different magnitude. It was an engine of destruction, a man-made flood on demand, a weaponized river system designed to wage a war against the earth. Pliny's account of the final stage, the Ruina Montium, is filled with the terror of a man witnessing a force of nature being unleashed by human hands. He describes the sounds, the trembling of the ground, and the apocalyptic collapse of the mountain. The miners are vanquished in the middle of their work, he writes, and their hopes are buried with them, so that it is less rash to go seeking for pearls in the depths of the sea. His account is not just a dry, technical description, it is a powerful piece of reportage, a testament to the immense human cost and the terrifying, sublime power of the operation. When we combine Pliny's textual evidence with the physical evidence on the ground, the vast scarred landscape, the remains of the aqueducts, the colossal piles of waste tailings, the full picture comes into focus. This was not just a mine. It was an industrial zone, the size of a small country, an enterprise that consumed mountains, moved rivers, and employed the population of a major city, all to produce a steady, predictable, and immense river of gold. It was an operation that likely had no parallel in the ancient world, and its sheer, brutal scale is the ultimate proof of the Roman genius for systematic engineering and the insatiable hunger of their imperial machine. The golden dust, harvested from the ashes of a shattered mountain, was the end of one immense industrial process, but it was only the beginning of another, equally important journey. This was the imperial gold pipeline, a heavily guarded, state-controlled supply chain designed to transport this priceless commodity from the remote mines of northwestern Spain and convert it, as efficiently as possible, into the standardized, fungible currency of imperial power, the gold aureus. The story of this pipeline is the story of how a raw material from a ravaged provincial landscape was transformed into the very lifeblood of the Roman state, the pay for its legions, and the ultimate guarantor of the Pax Romana. The journey began at the mining sites themselves. The refined gold dust would have been melted down in on-site foundries under the watchful eyes of imperial officials. It was then cast into rough, heavy, and easily transportable ingots. From this moment on, the gold was no longer a commodity. It was state property, a strategic asset of the highest possible value. The security surrounding its movement would have been immense. The ingots would have been loaded onto heavily guarded wagons under the direct control of the military. A legion, like the Legio Viae Gemina, based in nearby Lyon, would have had the primary responsibility for securing the entire region and, most critically, for protecting this river of gold as it began its long journey back to the heart of the empire. The pipeline from Spain likely followed the most secure and efficient routes available. The gold would have traveled overland along the excellent Roman road network that connected Hispania to the rest of the empire. It would have been moved in armed convoys, a slow but secure procession heading eastwards towards the great imperial mints. While the mint at Rome was the most important, the Romans also established major provincial mints to serve the needs of the armies. One of the most important of these was at Lugdunum, modern-day Lyon in France. Given its strategic position, it is highly likely that a significant portion of the Spanish gold was transported directly there to be converted into coinage. At the mint, the gold underwent its final transformation. It was a factory floor of a different kind, a place of immense precision and absolute security. The raw gold ingots would be carefully assayed for purity and then melted down. The molten gold would then be cast into small, standardized blanks or flans, each one carefully weighed to ensure it met the strict specifications of the aureus. These blanks were then passed to the moneyers, using a set of hardened bronze or iron dies, intricately carved with the emperor's portrait on one side, the obverse, and a piece of imperial propaganda on the other, the reverse. The moneyer would strike the blank with a heavy hammer. In that single, forceful instant, the raw, anonymous bullion from a Spanish mountain was transformed into a piece of imperial ideology, a coin that was both a unit of account and a portable declaration of the emperor's power and legitimacy. This was the final product of the entire, vast, transcontinental enterprise, but the journey of the gold was still not over. Its ultimate purpose was to be spent, and its most important destination was the frontier. From the great mints at Rome and Lugdunum, a new pipeline began, a pipeline of money flowing outwards to the great military encampments that guarded the edges of the empire. Massive shipments of these newly minted gold and silver coins would be sent under heavy guard to the provincial governors and the legionary paymasters. This was the Roman military economy in action. On payday, the soldiers of a legion stationed on the Rhine, the Danube, or on Hadrian's Wall in Britain would line up to receive their salary. The coins they received in their hands were the direct, tangible product of the entire imperial machine. The gold in that aureus, mined by a conscripted Asturian in a Spanish mountain, transported by a military convoy and struck by a worker in a Gallic mint, had now completed its epic journey. It was now in the hands of a soldier who would use it to buy food from a local merchant, to send money home to his family, or to save for his retirement bonus. This final transaction was the ultimate purpose of the entire immense operation. The gold from the mines of Ruin was the fuel that kept the legions loyal, that kept the frontiers secure, and that kept the entire delicate edifice of the Pax Romana standing. The system was a perfect, if brutal, imperial circuit. The state used its military to conquer and secure a resource-rich province. It then used its engineering genius to exploit that resource on a massive scale, and it used the wealth generated from that exploitation to pay for the very military that had made it all possible. The wrecked mountains of Spain were the silent, distant, and unacknowledged price of the peaceful, prosperous city of Rome and of the secure, well-defended frontiers of its vast empire. The gold that flowed from northwestern Spain was the lifeblood of the Roman imperial economy, a river of wealth that paid for peace and stability across a continent. But this river of gold was created by a river of water, and that water left behind a legacy of its own, a landscape of profound and permanent environmental devastation. The ruin in Ruina Montium was not just a turn of phrase, it was a literal description of the process's ecological consequences. The story of the end of the great Spanish mines is a dual one. It is a story of a landscape scarred beyond recognition, and of an industry that, after 2 centuries of relentless exploitation, simply faded away as the empire's strategic and economic priorities shifted. The most immediate and obvious environmental impact was the destruction of the mountains themselves. Over the course of 2 centuries, the Roman engineers literally dismantled a significant portion of the Medullus Massif. They washed away an estimated 500 million cubic meters of earth, a volume that is difficult for the mind to comprehend. The bizarre, breathtaking, and deeply unnatural landscape of red, pinnacled canyons that we see today is the direct result of this process. It is a fossilized industrial landscape, a vast, open-air monument to the sheer brute force power of Roman technology. But the devastation extended far beyond the immediate mining zone. The water used in the Ruina Montium process, now a thick, toxic slurry of mud, clay, and rock debris, had to go somewhere. The Romans channeled this waste, the sterols, into the local river systems. The once clear rivers of the region, like the Sil, were choked with millions of tons of this sediment. The riverbeds were raised, the floodplains were buried, and entire valleys were transformed into vast, sterile mudflats or relaves. This would have had a catastrophic effect on the downstream agricultural economy, burying fertile farmland under a thick layer of industrial waste. Furthermore, this slurry was not just simple mud. The process of hydraulic mining would have leached a cocktail of heavy metals from the pulverized rock. The water flowing away from Las Medullas would have been a toxic soup, likely containing high levels of arsenic and mercury, elements often found in association with gold deposits. This would have poisoned the rivers, killed the fish, and contaminated the drinking water for communities for miles downstream. The Pax Romana in the heart of the empire was, in a very real sense, paid for by the poisoning of the provincial landscape on its periphery. The ruin of the mountains was also the ruin of the rivers. So why did this massive, and for so long, essential industrial operation come to an end? The end was not sudden, but a slow fading that began in the early 3rd century AD. One simple reason was depletion. After 200 years of the most intensive and destructive mining imaginable, the Romans had simply exhausted the richest and most easily accessible of the alluvial gold deposits. The easy gold was gone, and the remaining deposits would have required even greater effort and lower profit margins to extract. A second, more decisive, factor was the arrival of a new and far richer source of gold. In the early 2nd century AD, the Emperor Trajan conquered the kingdom of Dacia in modern-day Romania. The mountains of Dacia were home to the richest gold mines in all of Europe, not the low-grade alluvial dust of Spain, but massive, high-yield, hard rock veins of pure gold. The wealth that flowed from these new Dacian mines was so immense that it dwarfed the output of the Spanish operations. The Roman state, with its finite resources of engineers and manpower, began to shift its focus and its investment towards this new, more profitable prize. The Spanish mines, while still productive, were no longer the single, indispensable source they had once been. Finally, the entire system was given its death blow by the Great Crisis of the 3rd century, the same period of civil war, barbarian invasion, and political chaos that had disrupted the other great trade routes of the empire also shattered the security and the logistical infrastructure needed to run the Spanish mines. In a world of constant usurpation and breakaway empires, a distant provincial resource, no matter how valuable, was difficult to control. The security of the gold pipeline could no longer be guaranteed. As the empire began to fracture, its ability to manage a vast, complex, and long-term industrial project like Las Medullas simply withered away. By the time the Roman Empire fell in the west, the great mines of Spain had long since fallen silent. The aqueducts crumbled, the reservoirs silted up, and the local forests slowly began to reclaim the scarred red earth. The immense technology and the complex organization were forgotten, leaving behind only the strange, haunted landscape, a monument to an age of industrial ambition that would not be seen again for over 1,000 years. The price of the empire's gold, in the end, was a wound in the earth so deep that it has still not healed. Our investigation began with the haunting, man-made landscape of Las Medullas and a simple question: how and why did the Romans wreck these mountains? Having traced the empire's insatiable demand for gold, they constructed the apocalyptic technology of hydraulic mining and followed the river of gold from the shattered mountainside to the frontiers of the empire. The evidence is now clear. The verdict is that the Roman gold mines of northwestern Spain were the single most important financial asset of the early empire, and the Ruina Montium was a revolutionary industrial process of unprecedented scale and brutality. This was not mining as we know it, it was geological warfare, waged for the sole purpose of funding the imperial machine. We have established that the birth of the Roman Empire under Augustus created a fiscal crisis of immense proportions. The need to pay a massive, permanent, professional army and to stabilize a new imperial currency created an insatiable, state-level demand for a vast and reliable supply of gold. This was not a desire for luxury, it was a strategic necessity. Our investigation has shown that the Romans met this demand by targeting the unique, low-grade alluvial gold deposits of northwestern Spain. They correctly identified that this diffuse resource could only be exploited profitably through an operation of immense scale. Their solution The Ruina Montium was a brilliant and terrifying feat of hydraulic engineering. We have detailed the three key stages: the construction of hundreds of miles of precision-surveyed aqueducts to bring the water, the honeycombing of the mountains with a network of galleries, and the final, apocalyptic release of the water to shatter the mountain with explosive hydraulic pressure. We have, through the remarkable eyewitness account of Pliny the Elder, quantified the staggering scale of this enterprise. With an annual output of 20,000 Roman pounds of gold and a workforce of 60,000 men, this was the largest industrial operation in the ancient world, dwarfing even the great civic projects of Rome itself. Finally, we have charted the imperial pipeline, the secure state-controlled supply chain that transformed this provincial raw material into the financial fuel of the empire. The gold from the mines was minted into the ore that guaranteed the stability of the Roman economy and, most critically, paid the wages of the legions who guaranteed the Pax Romana. The entire imperial system, from its military security to its economic confidence, was underwritten by the success of this single, massive, and brutally efficient industrial operation. The mines of ruin were, in the end, the engine room of the Roman Empire. The great hydraulic machines of Las Medullas have fallen silent. The aqueducts are crumbling, and the roar of the collapsing mountains has been replaced by the quiet rustle of chestnut leaves. The river of gold that once flowed from this corner of Spain to the heart of Rome has long since run dry. But the legacy of this incredible enterprise endures, written in two starkly contrasting forms: in the very stability of the Roman peace it funded, and in the deep, permanent scars it left upon the face of the earth. The story of the mines of ruin is a profound and timeless lesson in the true cost of empire. The landscape of Las Medullas, now an UNESCO World Heritage Site, is a monument to a singular and almost terrifying vision. It is a testament to the Roman genius for systematic thinking, for engineering on a scale that beggars belief, and for the ruthless mobilization of both natural and human resources in the service of the state. In this, it is a perfect microcosm of the Roman Empire itself. The same organizational brilliance that could build the Colosseum and the same logistical mastery that could supply the legions on the frontier were brought to bear on this single, colossal project. It is a powerful reminder that the foundations of the Pax Romana, with its centuries of stability and its immense cultural achievements, were laid not just by soldiers and statesmen, but also by the anonymous, brilliant engineers who learned how to tame rivers and move mountains. But this triumph of technology was also an environmental catastrophe. The story of Las Medullas is a story written from the perspective of the conqueror of the imperial center. For the local peoples, the Astures and Canterbury, and for the landscape they inhabited, it was a story of profound and violent disruption. Their world was reshaped, their mountains were consumed, and their rivers were poisoned, all to satisfy the abstract financial needs of a distant superpower. In this, the mines of ruin are a chillingly modern parable. They are a forerunner to the great open-pit mines, the tar sands, and the mountaintop removal projects of our own industrial age. It is a timeless lesson that the wealth and comfort of an empire's core is often built upon the systematic and often brutal exploitation of the resources of its periphery. Ultimately, the strange, haunting beauty of the Las Medullas landscape is the most enduring legacy of this ancient trade. It is an accidental masterpiece, a cathedral of destruction. It is a place that forces us to confront the profound contradictions of the Roman world and of empire itself. It is a place that is both a monument to human ingenuity and a memorial to its devastating consequences. The gold that was extracted here is long gone, melted down and reminted 1,000 times by the succeeding ages. But the price that was paid for it, a wound in the earth so vast it can be seen from space, remains. These crimson scars are the permanent, silent testament to the insatiable hunger of the imperial machine.